The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. At that time, Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But you, who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not on the side of God, but of men." And he called to him the multitude with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." The Gospel of the Lord. May those of the gospel keep us safe for eternal life. In today's gospel, Jesus is journeying with his disciples, and he puts a question to them. "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples they mention the names of all the great people who had existed in their Jewish faith. Some say that you are Elijah. Some say that you are one of the great prophets who have risen from the dead. Something that you are John the Baptist. And then he turns to them, "But you, who do you say that I am?" And Peter, answering on behalf of the rest of the disciples, he says, "You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, or you are the anointed one. But you, who do you say that I am?" In the history of Christianity, from the birth to the death of Jesus and until he ascended into heaven, many people have looked at him from different perspectives. Some think of him as a great moral teacher, one of the guys who came into this world to teach us about morality and the good life to live, and then he died and it sort of came to an end. While others see him as a prophet, a prophet of old who came to teach God's word, and then unfortunately at the hands of evil men, he died. And for me and you, we believe, at least I hope this is what we believe, that he is God. He's the King of Kings. He's the King of our lives. He's the one who came into this earth so that he can die to reconcile us with God. Now, here's the thing about Jesus. There's no gray area about him. It's either you believe that Jesus is the King of Kings. He's the Son of the Eternal Father. He's the one who came into this world to die for our sins. He's the one who still sits in heaven at God's right hand, interceding for us. The greatest man who has ever lived and who has changed humanity for all eternity. Or, alternatively, he was a crook. He was a man who came under disguise to confuse people, who lied about his life until the very end and ultimately was killed because he was confusing the minds of people. He was a heretic who had wrong teachings. It's one of those two. It cannot be on the fence. It cannot be a gray area. We cannot relate to Jesus as some good guy who came and did good deeds and eventually died. It's either we accept that he's God or he is not. There isn't a gray area, just like our faith. We cannot be Sunday Catholics. We cannot be Sunday Christians. We cannot go to the faith and take only that which we like and sort of leave the rest as if you're in a buffet restaurant. It's either we take it all or we leave all of it. I'm for the opinion that the reason that Christianity has become the joke that it has become, because it has become a joke. If you're a Christian, you are seen as a person who's not fully in charge of his faculties. And that's because we've got Christians who sit on the fence. We've got Christians who are Christians on Sunday, and the rest of the week, heaven knows what they are. We've got people who are not totally dedicated to their faith. It's either we are for Jesus or we are against him. We cannot sit on a fence. In the book of Revelation, in one of John's vision, God says, if you are cold, be cold. If you are hot, be hot. Don't be lukewarm, or else I will throw you out. I'll regurgitate you. I'll vomit you. That's what God says. Be hot or be cold. And that's the same thing about Jesus. It's either he's God or he is not. So Jesus in our gospel then asks, who do people say that I am? And then he goes particularly to them. Who do you say that I am? Now, the gospel tells us that Jesus is asking this question there in the region of Caesarea Philippi. This is the place where Caesar who was the ruler there, and him being a ruler, he thought he was a god. Caesar was also not completely well upstairs. So people over there had to worship him. He was a sort of the god of that town. And hence he named the place after himself and his father. His father's name was Philip and he was Caesar. So hence the name Caesarea Philippi. Jesus is asking this in a place where there is already a sort of an established God. There is already someone whom the people turn to for worship and for praise and for answers. And Peter rightly answers. He says, you are the Christ. So even though we are living in a world or in a place where people are already content with the God that they worship, but I still believe that you are the Christ. You are the one who's sent by God to change life on this earth. You are the one who's ultimately going to free us from everything. And Jesus is not against that. Jesus sort of agrees with Peter, but he just tells them not to let other people know. And immediately Jesus turns and he speaks about how he's going to suffer, how he's going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and how they're going to beat him up. He's going to be abused, and eventually he's going to die at the hands of these people. And Peter then becomes confused. I've just said to you that you are the Messiah. I just said to you that you are the greatest guy who's existing currently in this place. That can't happen to you. You can't die at the hands of the Jews. So Peter takes him aside and says, no, Lord, that's not going to happen. We can't allow that to happen. And we are told that Jesus rebukes him. Rebukes him with probably one of the strongest words that we find in the gospel. Get behind me, Satan, because you are on the side of men and not on the side of God. Another translation is going to say, because you think like men, you don't think like God. What Christ is doing here is establishing what sort of king he is going to be. Yes, he's a Messiah, he's the king, he's the Christ, but it's not the one that Peter had in mind, who was going to come riding high on a horse with a sword in his hand. Rather, he's going to be the one that we heard of in our first reading, the one who's going to give his back to those who strike him, the one who's not going to hide his face from those who are spitting at him and pulling him by the beard. The reason that Jesus condemns Peter so much is that Peter wants to block Jesus from going to the cross. Peter does not understand that Christ and the cross are one. Peter does not understand that for Jesus Christ to establish this kingdom, for me and you to be adopted sons and daughters of this kingdom that Christ is about to establish, the cross had to be vital. The cross was where we are going to be born anew. The cross is where me and you are going to receive life. The cross is where me and you were no longer going to be orphans, but we're going to have the ability to return to God the Father. Christ understood the mystery, but also the importance of the cross. That is why later in the gospel today, when he's with his disciples, and we are told with a multitude of people, he says to them, if you want to follow me, if you want to be my disciple, you have got to take up your cross and you've got to follow me. You have got to embrace hardship. You've got to go to those uncomfortable places. You've got to experience pain in your life, but you know that you are experiencing it with me. And we all have our crosses. Each and everyone here has a cross that they are suffering with. Each and everyone here has a battle. There's something that we are honestly trying to fight against. And Christ, 3 times, he fell. 3 times he fell with his own cross. It was heavy for him. And when he went to the very end, Simon of Cyrene had to help him carry it because it was so heavy. It seemed as if he was not going to finish the journey. So it's okay if maybe you trip over your cross. It's okay at times when you feel that it's too much and you feel like putting it down. It's okay at times. Put it down, sit on top of it, pray for it, but don't give it up. You cannot give up your cross because that is where your glory lies. And I'm sure you've noticed that whenever you try to come closer to God, whenever you say, I'm going to mend my ways and I'm going to live a proper life of what a Christian is supposed to live, ever notice that that's when all the trouble sort of comes into your life? Most of the time when you turn to Jesus, it's as if you open the floodgates for things to go wrong. That is because you have stopped sitting on the fence. That is because you have made a conscious decision to say, I'm going back to Jesus. And the devil doesn't like that because he also fights. While you are still sitting in his corner, he's okay, he doesn't worry about you. But once you say, I'm turning to God now, I want to be one with God, he also starts to attack you. And that's fine. It's okay to have those difficulties, but we know that we have those difficulties, we are still one with Christ. We know that in our hardships, in our sufferings, when we feel like giving up, we are not alone. We carry our crosses, yes, but we look at Christ, who carries his in front of us, and we come after him. And as I said, we've got different crosses, different shapes and different sizes. but your cross is always your size. If you're as big as me, you are not going to get a cross that's this big. You got to carry a cross that is going to be able at some point to carry you. So it's bound to be heavy. It's bound to be difficult. Whether it's a cross of an ailment, maybe you are sick and you've been constantly sick. Maybe it's a cross of constant death in the family. Maybe it's a cross of unemployment, a cross of poverty. We follow Christ nevertheless, carrying that cross, because for us, that is the glory. That is how me and you will be able to enter the kingdom of heaven after passing through these trials and difficulties. We don't give up our crosses. We don't give up our crosses. We don't cut our crosses short either. We don't try to make them lighter by shedding them. We don't sell our crosses also maybe to our neighbors. We have got to be faithful to them, and we have got to be faithful to the very end. The story is told about these 4 women. They had an agreement with a king. The king says to them, I'll give you mansions, huge, beautiful mansions, each one. So there are 4 mansions for these 4 ladies. And these mansions are situated on top of a hill, and it's a long winding road that you have to walk up to get to those mansions. But there's a trick. Each one has to carry 25-liter bucket that is filled with sand. You've got to carry it from the starting point up until you reach the top of the hill. And they're all okay then. They say, okay, no, that's fine. We'll be able to do that. And then they are given these 25-liter buckets that are filled with sand, and they are heavy. So they carry them, and because there are always those people in life that think that they are clever than others, 2 of them decide, let's walk fast. Let's leave these other 2 behind. And they start pacing a bit further. And the minute they turn the first corner, they decide that they're going to empty their buckets, take out the sand, and say, let's take out the sand here. And when we reach the top, we're going to fill it up again. So it will seem as if we've been carrying it all the way through. Sure enough, these 2 empty their buckets, and they carry it now empty. The other 2 who have been faithful to this are looking at them at the distance and the way they are walking, and they are wondering, how in God's name are they walking so fast? Because these buckets are heavy. They're extremely heavy. We walk 10 minutes and we have to put them down and rest. And going uphill doesn't make it any easier. So they faithfully follow behind them. And these 2 who are in front, when they get to the top, they quickly fill their buckets with sand again, and they appear before the king, and they say, well, here we are. The king says, well, congratulations, you have done well. You have passed the test. Put your buckets down, and you've got to sit down. We've got to wait for the other 2 who are coming up, so that we can do this together. And they sit for hours while those other 2 labor walking up the mountain. And at about sunset, when the day is almost over, the last 2 finally arrive with their buckets. And they put it down, and the king says, congratulations. And you can see the last 2, they're tired. They've been through the most. They're close to tears because of how difficult this journey had been. And the king says, well, you have done well. And as I've promised you, here are the 4 mansions that belongs to each one of you. And they are all excited, and they say, thank you so much. You're a good king and you are generous. Keys, please. And the king says, the keys are in the buckets that you are carrying. Empty out the sand and you'll find your key over there. Those 2 who decided that they were smart, they left their keys down at the beginning of the mountain. But for those who were faithful, for those who didn't give up, For those who suffered the journey going up, they ultimately got the reward. They found their keys and they entered their mansions. Don't give up your cross. That's the way that you are going to enter into your kingdom. That is the key to your mansion, to your palace. No matter how difficult it is, no matter how tempting it is, be faithful to your cross.